Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a really chilling concept laid out in our source documents. We're going to conduct a biotechnological audit of what the authors describe as the ultimate surveillance panopticon. These texts outline a sprawling, incredibly advanced network that operates completely under the radar, and I mean literally under the radar, on a level so microscopic it's completely invisible to the naked eye.
When we think about surveillance, most of us worry about the obvious things, right? We look up at cameras on street corners, we maybe tape over the webcams on our laptops, or worry about the GPS trackers in our phones. But the source material makes a truly bold claim. It argues that the deep state is building a surveillance grid out of microscopic cameras and sensors that you actually breathe in. Seriously, how do you hide from a microphone that is floating in the air right next to your face? It's a question that completely reframes how we even think about privacy.
To wrap our heads around this, we're going to treat this explainer like a classified technical briefing, unmasking this alleged planetary system step by step. First, the invisible panopticon, then the engineering behind smart dust. We'll follow that with the Aerosol Mesh Network, the 5G frequency fence, the sentient world simulation, and finally, what the sources call the Archonic Endgame.
Okay, starting with Section 1, the invisible panopticon.
Okay, let's dive into this comparison. The sources argue that there's a massive, deliberate misdirection happening right now. The public is kept distracted by visible surveillance. You know, the CCTV cameras, cell tower tracking, facial recognition at the airport. This gives us this false illusion that if we just leave our phones at home, we can hide. But the deep state surveillance column reveals the true, invisible panopticon. We are talking about aerosolized microscopic sensors and real-time biometric sweeping. The argument here is that you simply cannot evade a system that is integrated into the atmosphere itself.
Moving right along to Section 2, engineering smart dust.
To understand how this is even physically possible, we have to look at the actual hardware that serves as the foundation for this alleged network. The text details the development of what is literally called smart dust, or Micro-Electromechanical Systems, MEMS for short, and the documents explicitly link the miniaturization and weaponization of these sensors to heavy funding by DARPA. So we aren't talking about clunky microchips here. These are cybernetic, autonomous sensors about the size of a grain of sand or even smaller. And despite being microscopic, they pack incredible processing, communication, and environmental sensing capabilities.
And once these microscopic devices are floating around in our environment, they aren't just passively sitting there. They're actively harvesting a huge array of data. As they silently drift in the air or settle on the surfaces in your home, they are recording localized temperature changes, specific chemical signatures, high-fidelity audio, physical movement, and really profound biological metrics. They essentially turn the air around us into an active recording witness.
Which brings us to Section 3, the Aerosol Mesh Network. Let's see how this actually builds, because having microscopic sensors is only half the battle. They have to be distributed. The documents outline a highly structured four-step deployment cycle. It kicks off with aerosol dispersal, where military planners purportedly release these nanobots via aerosol sprays over specific cities or entire battlefields. Step 2 is atmospheric saturation, basically filling the breathing zone with these invisible particles. Step 3 is absolutely crucial. Once deployed, they form a self-organizing mesh. They link up wirelessly, acting like a massive invisible circuit board in the sky. And finally, Step 4 is data harvesting, where this newly formed grid silently starts transmitting everything it sees, hears, and feels.
Now, you might be wondering, how do they disperse this without anyone noticing? The sources claim the technology relies on patented acoustic vibrating mesh technology, specifically something called Piezoelectric nebulization. So instead of using loud, bulky compressors or obvious chemical propellants, they use sound. A crystal vibrates a mesh plate up to 130,000 times per second. When the liquid containing the smart dust hits it, that acoustic energy physically shatters the liquid into a perfectly uniform, totally silent, and completely invisible dry fog. It's designed to be inhaled directly into the lungs without the person ever realizing they've been compromised.
Next up, Section 4, the 5G frequency fence.
Okay, so once this dust is deployed in recording, it obviously needs a way to send that mountain of data back to headquarters. The source documents are incredibly aggressive regarding the modern telecommunications infrastructure required to pull this off. Just listen to this quote. The rapid, forced, and globally coordinated rollout of 5G infrastructure is the deployment of a planetary-scale, military-grade directed energy weapon system. The authors are arguing that 5G small cells and low Earth orbit satellites, like Starlink, aren't actually about giving you faster internet.
They claim they are the physical manifestation of a frequency fence, designed to process the infinite behavioral data coming from the smart dust while simultaneously bombarding the population with weaponized frequencies.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how they reportedly track us using this infrastructure. The sources detail something called Project Murmur. It allegedly utilizes Generation 2 SERF magnetometers. That stands for Spin Exchange Relaxation-Free Sensors. Because these specific sensors don't require heavy cryogenic cooling, they can easily be slapped onto high-altitude drones or satellites. From the sky, they sweep the target area, filter out the background magnetic noise of the Earth, and lock onto the distinct microscopic magnetic pulse of the human heart. They can even read the magnetic waves of the brain. According to the text, they are literally tracking the human soul by its electrical signature.
Let's move to Section 5, Sentient World Simulation.
So, with the smart dust collecting the data, the 5G grid transmitting it, and quantum sensors tracking our biometric pulses from space, where does all this infinite, planetary-scale data actually go? The crucial point the authors make is that human analysts could never ever process this much information. Instead, it gets fed into the Sentient World Simulation, or SWS. The documents describe this as a continuously running, highly classified digital mirror model of the real world. Powered by massive quantum computing facilities, AI algorithms synthesize the data streams from the Internet of Bodies, the smart dust, and social media. It builds a multidimensional profile of every single citizen to actively predict and ultimately manipulate human behavior on a global scale. Finally, we reach Section 6, the Archonic Endgame.
This brings us to the final, and honestly the most metaphysical layer of the source material. Why construct this absolute panopticon in the first place? Well, the documents introduce a concept known as Loosh. Loosh is defined here as the negative emotional energy, fear, anger, despair, agitation, generated by conscious beings. The text alleges that the ultimate architects of this whole surveillance grid are actually non-physical, parasitic entities called Archons. They supposedly use the smart dust, the 5G frequency manipulation, and the sentient world simulation not just to keep an eye on us, but to actively keep the population in a continuous, perpetual state of anxiety and polarization. In this framework, Earth is literally a prison reality, and the surveillance grid is just a massive farming mechanism to harvest this emotional energy.
Putting all this on a timeline based on the author's claims, we see a very distinct multi-decade progression. It starts back in the early 2000s, with DARPA laying the groundwork through their chip-scale atomic clock programs. By the 2010s, we hit the massive miniaturization of sensors and those SERF magnetometers we talked about. Fast forward to the 2020s, and the physical infrastructure is abruptly rushed into place, the 5G and Starlink rollout acting as the crucial carrier wave. And according to this indictment, the whole shebang culminates around 2026. That's when the smart dust, the biometric sweeps, and the frequency fence are fully integrated into the sentient world's quantum AI.
Which leaves us right back at the ultimate question posed by the source documents. How do you hide from a microphone that is floating in the air? If the Panopticon isn't made of concrete and visible cameras, but is instead built right into the ambient aerosol grid, the 5G frequencies passing through your walls, and the very dust that settles on your skin, is there any true off-the-grid left? It's a wildly provocative framework that absolutely forces us to look at the invisible forces shaping our reality in a completely different light. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I encourage you to keep questioning the world around you.